Hello everybody, my name is Natalie Vaz. I work at the Outdoor Center as a trip leader at the front desk and sometimes as a bike tech. So if you recognize me, maybe that's where you've seen me. I hope everybody is holding together as good as possible during this crazy time. One piece of advice that I just wanted to give out, for me, something that has worked really well is to make a schedule. I kind of held off on doing this for a while. I ended up staying up until 3 o'clock in the morning and not getting out of bed until noon or later, and just these past few days I started making a schedule, and it's definitely something that can really help you kind of just make the days flow along and kind of get through this. So yeah, that and also, if at all possible, just get outside, even if it's for 30 minutes, 20 minutes, just go on a walk, a bike ride, whatever you can do, because that's something that will definitely really help you. Alright, so now to the content of this video, which is spearfishing. I started spearfishing about 1.5 years ago when I was studying abroad in Costa Rica. My host dad would go out and go fishing every weekend with this spear gun that he had, and I didn't really know what it was and didn't really understand it, and finally, just before I was actually about to leave, he invited me to go to the river with him and swim alongside him as he was spearfishing. And I pretty much fell in love with that type of fishing. Before that, I had been fishing a lot in my life, and mainly with fly fishing and spinning rods, but I'd never even heard of spearfishing, so it really opened up my eyes to a different way and perhaps a more active, physically engaging way to fish rather than just, sitting along a bank and casting. With spearfishing, you are submerging yourself into the water, you're using a mask, snorkels. If you're in the ocean, oftentimes you're diving deep distances and holding your breath and doing a lot of swimming, and in the rivers you're also not as much so diving, but definitely some physical exertion that doesn't exist with maybe some other types of fishing. Alright, so what is a spear gun? Here I'll try to go over a little bit of the technical details of how this piece of equipment functions. This right here is a relatively small spear gun that I bought when I was just in Costa Rica again this past December. It's definitely meant for smaller fish. I would almost go as far as saying that it's kind of just meant for learning. Once you actually get the hang of how the sport works, this gun isn't the best. I ended up hitting a lot of fish and wasn't able to penetrate them just because of the gun not being super powerful. So that's something to keep in mind when buying a gun. So first thing, most important, is the safety. Most guns will have a safety. Here's the switch on and off. This is obviously the trigger. Like with any gun, you never want to point it at anybody. You want to always assume that it's loaded, even if it's not loaded. Super important, because these things can kill. They're not a toy at all. Something else that I think I should mention is that it's really important that you don't ever shoot a spear gun out of the water. It's not something a lot of people think about, but the rubber bands, the slingshots here, they can backlash. They're only meant to be shot in the water, and so if you just shoot it in your backyard or something, they can backlash, get you in the face. It would be really painful. Also, since they weren't designed to be shot out of the water, just the extra, I guess, the water slows down kind of the effect of shooting the gun, and so it would just be bad on the equipment if you were to shoot it out of the water, even if you didn't hurt yourself. So that's something to keep in mind. So how does it work? I'll do my best to show you guys this. A little bit hard with just one hand here, but basically what you do to load the gun is you bring this guy all the way back to here. There's a little groove here on the spear, and once you do that, the gun is loaded. I will do that really fast. Alright, now the gun is loaded. I made sure before loading it up that safety was on. That way if I pull the trigger, nothing will happen. And so how it works is, say I were to take the safety off, then there'd be nothing holding the spear into the shaft. And so when I pull the trigger to release the spear, the spear can be kind of carried by the power that's in this elastic band, and it will be projected along the path that you're pointed at. So that's how that works. That's where it gets its power. As far as the spear goes, the end of the spear has this little guy on it, and the function of it is so that once you hopefully hit a fish, the spear will be through the fish like this, and the spear won't be able to wiggle out of the fish because this will be preventing it from falling back out of the skin of the fish. After you've shot a fish, hopefully hit it, you have this length of line here, and this is a pretty important thing to kind of change depending on what you're actually fishing for, because say you're fishing for something really big, you'll have to have some more play with your fish, and so you'd want a longer line. For a fish that isn't quite so big, a shorter line like this is fine because it's not going to have so much power to fight against you, and you should be able to kind of control it without too much line. I think it is about to pour down rain, so I'm going to evacuate inside for the rest of this video. Putting the gun back together is always something you want to make sure you do right. You don't want any malfunctions. So basically what you do, make sure the string doesn't have any tangles. Your line there is all good. Then you'll put the spear back through the shaft like this, making sure that the groove right here is pointed up. You don't want that pointed down. So point it up so you can put the rubber band back on it so it can shoot. And then what you do with your extra string is you tuck it back here so it's not just hanging around when you're swimming around, which could be dangerous if you get caught up on something. And then you're all ready to go. Make sure that your safety's on, and then you can pull your rubber band back and load your gun and go try to shoot another fish. Now, as far as actual strategies for spearfishing, most of my experience is actually in Costa Rica, so it might be a little bit difficult to relate, but I'll go ahead and tell you guys. It kind of depends also on if you're in the rivers or the oceans. I'll start out with the rivers. In the rivers there, most of them are kind of like very brushy along the edges, and so what the strategy is to swim along the edges, and you kind of hide yourself in the branches there, and you wait until fish swim by and you shoot them. Or what you do, you kind of call the fish in, which is basically you take your hand up and slap the water like this 3 or 4 times, and the fish there, they're called pargo. I think the English name is red snapper. They get really curious about that, and they kind of swim up to you, and that's when you can take your shot at them. And as far as the ocean goes, here obviously you have a lot more depth to work with usually, and so what I kind of do is swim along the surface. You'll definitely want to use flippers, fins in the ocean. You'll probably have to be swimming longer distances, and you'll have to be diving a lot deeper, and they'll just help you save your energy, and when you're diving, get down to the fish a lot faster before they potentially swim away. But when you do see a fish, you'll start diving, take a big breath, and dive down towards it. And you want to make sure you don't do any sort of sudden movements. This will startle the fish. And so just take your breath, descend by kicking your legs, and maybe breathing out a little bit of air if you have to, but really you want to use the power of your flippers as much as possible so that you can maintain the air in your lungs. And make sure also that whenever your gun is, when you're swimming down, you want to kind of make sure your gun is where you want it, in the position that you want to shoot it at. You don't want to have it here and then put it out in front of you like that when you're ready to shoot, because that motion will startle the fish and make it swim away. So one thing that's really important to keep in mind for spearfishing is the rules and regulations of where you're fishing. As far as Washington, I don't want to go into all the details because I know I don't know the rules that well and I don't want to mislead you, but I know it is pretty strict, and basically if something is considered a game fish, you're not allowed to spear it. And from my general experience, it does seem as though spearfishing is a lot less regulated in saltwater than it would be in a freshwater lake like Lake Whatcom or in any rivers. And finally, if you're thinking about buying a spear gun, there's a few things that I would suggest keeping in mind. For one, especially for me, is that it would be nice to have a super powerful spear gun, but one thing to remember is that the more powerful the spear gun, the longer that you have to bring the rubber band back, and the harder it could be to do. So, for example, my friend's spear gun in Costa Rica, I can't load the gun because you just have to have so much arm strength to bring the rubber band back and to load it. And so I can, fish with that gun if somebody else loads it, but it's a little bit too powerful for me in that sense. So I would say better to start off with maybe something a little bit smaller to get used to the sport. And if you have any fear with being able to load the gun, just maybe start off with a slightly smaller, and you can work your way up to something bigger as needed. The other thing is making sure that the little flap on the end of your spear is big enough to prevent the spear from leaving a fish that you shoot. For example, this past summer I shot a silver salmon in Alaska, and the salmon got away, even though the flap went through, the spear went through, the flap was there, but the fish was so powerful that it basically ripped itself away from the spear, even with the flap being there. So what I needed was a bigger flap. So if you're going after super powerful fish like salmon or tuna or what have you, just make sure that you maybe upgrade the flap on the end of your spear if needed. So I hope this video has maybe brought to you some more information about spearfishing and piqued your interest, and I hope that you learned something, that you feel like your time was well spent, and that you stay healthy and maybe have something new to look forward to whenever all this is over, a spearfishing trip to a local river or lake or ocean. So take care, be well, and see you guys when this is over.